There's a lot of misleading propaganda about the Middle East that has gained wide acceptance as truth in the West. One of the arguments made is that Palestine was made up mostly of Palestinian Arabs until Jews immigrated and usurped their land. One venue on which this propaganda was posted was on the Metro-North billboards shown here. This propaganda is very misleading because of what it selectively leaves out. In this video, I fill in some of the inconvenient facts that propagandists leave out or deny. Those who claim that the Palestinian Muslims were there first conveniently forget that the first kingdom of Israel was established around the 11th century before the Common Era, over 1,000 years before invading Muslims occupied her. Prior to the Muslim invasion, there were many other invasions, resulting in Jews being scattered throughout Asia, Africa, and Europe. This map shows how the Assyrians and Babylonians scattered the Jews. This is a bas-relief from the Arch of Titus, illustrating Romans carrying off the gold menorah from the Second Temple, which they destroyed in 70 A.D. The Roman invaders renamed Israel Palestine, which means land of the Philistines. The Philistines are believed to have come from the Aegean Sea and are described by the Bible as Israel's worst enemy. In 1516, the Ottomans invaded Israel and it became part of the Ottoman Empire shown here. In 1917, the Ottoman Empire collapsed and the Turks lost Palestine to the British. Mark Twain traveled through Israel in 1867 while it was part of the Ottoman Empire. He wrote about his observations in a book called The Innocents Abroad. Quote, "A desolate country whose soil is rich enough but is given over wholly to weeds. A silent, mournful expanse. A desolation. We never saw a human being on the whole route. Hardly a tree or shrub anywhere. Even the olive tree and the cactus, those fast friends of a worthless soil, had almost deserted the country." End quote. The reason the area was so desolate was Palestinian Arab Bedouin marauders who preyed on those wishing to farm the land and who overgrazed the land. The Turks cut down trees for firewood and supplies during World War I, and perhaps did so before Mark Twain toured the country, so that may be another reason. Jews were persecuted in Israel and throughout the Muslim countries to which they were exiled. This is a map of massacres of Jews by Muslims. In addition to being persecuted in Muslim countries, Jews were persecuted in Europe. Zionists such as Theodor Herzl saw return to their ancient homeland as the only hope for the Jews to escape persecution. Jews from all over the world donated money to pay the exorbitant prices demanded by Arab landowners in Israel for land. On November 1917, Lord Balfour declared, quote, "His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people." This became known as the Balfour Declaration. This is a map of the homeland envisaged for the Jewish people. In 1939, the British feared that the Arab world would ally itself with Hitler, and so issued a policy paper called the MacDonald White Paper, which made all Jewish immigration after 1944 dependent on permission by the Arabs. Lloyd George, a member of the British Parliament, protested the White Paper in the House of Commons in a speech that reveals that the Arabs benefited from Jewish immigration to Palestine. Here is an excerpt from his speech. Quote, "So far, taking the last 25 centuries, the Jews are the only people who have made a success of this rather stony land. The fact of the matter is that when the other races came there, they did not. Jewish capital has been flowing into that country since the peace, and Jewish capital has improved Arab conditions. Most of the land cultivated by the Jews is land which they have reclaimed from the wilderness. Most of the land acquired by the Jews was swampy and malarial and required heavy expenditure on drainage before it could be made habitable. Much of the rest was sand dunes. What is the result? Not merely can you settle more people on the land, but you have improved the health of the community. Malaria is a very serious disease there, and it was slaughtering these poor people. and by this enormous expenditure of Zion and the other associations, such as the Colonization Society, great tracts of territory have been drained in these areas, and malaria has been eliminated. The Jewish contribution to the improvement of Palestine is incalculable. In hospitals, in medical services, in research, and in drainage, they are doing far more than the government are doing. It is the same in the case of education. Why is Palestine such an arid waste? Because the Turks cut down the trees. The result is parched land away from the hills. The Jews have not merely planted a great number of trees themselves, but have provided millions of seedlings for the government for the purpose of enabling them to plant as well. They are creating industries which were non-existent before and which are helpful to the Arabs as well as to the Jews and give better wages to the Arabs. Their wages have gone up by 120% since the standard was set up by the Jewish Confederation. Another man who protested the white paper was John McCormack of Massachusetts. He gave a speech in the U.S. House of Representatives in which he said, "The Arab population has risen from 400,000 in 1920 to about 950,000, an increase of over 50% in 17 years. Under Turkish rule, the population was almost stationary. From all this it follows that since the Jewish population will not be allowed to increase by more than 75,000, and since there will be no restriction placed upon Arab immigration, the Jewish national home will soon be swamped by the surrounding non-Jewish population, and Jews will properly feel that they have been led into a trap by promises that they would be able to build up a commonwealth. This new plan to arbitrarily limit immigration will slow up the development of the country. With the increase of population in Palestine, there has been a corresponding increase of wealth and new and increased possibilities for more." Why did the Arabs only immigrate once the Jews immigrated? Could it be because of the improvements in the standard of living in the region that the Jews made? Could it be because the Jews made the desert bloom? Did the Arabs show any gratitude for this? Ladislas Farago, a war correspondent, traveled through Palestine in the 1930s and wrote a book called Palestine at the Crossroads. He wrote, "One always finds in Palestine Arabs who have been in the country only a few weeks or a few months. Since they are themselves strangers in a strange land, they are the loudest to cry, 'Out with the Jews!' Amongst them are to be found representatives of every Arab country, Arabs from Transjordan, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, Egypt, the Sudan, and Iraq." Despite protests against the unfairness of the policies of the White Paper, the British implemented it. While Nazis massacred Jews, the British government blocked Jews from fleeing to the Jewish national home. This is a picture of starving victims of the Nazis at the Ebensee concentration camp in Austria. When Israel declared independence in 1948, it was faced with two threats: the surrounding Arab armies and the Arabs living in Israel itself. Azam Pasha, Secretary General of the Arab League, declared, "This will be a war of extermination and a momentous massacre which will be spoken of like the Mongolian massacres and the Crusades." Muslims in Israel were told by Muslims outside of Israel that if they didn't leave Israel, they'd be considered renegades, and they better leave so as not to get in the way of the invasion. Thus the Palestinian refugee problem was born. This is a map of the Arab flight from Israel. The Arab states failed to destroy Israel, but Jordan succeeded in occupying Judea and Samaria, and Egypt succeeded in occupying Gaza, as shown in this map. The defeat of the Arab world by Little Israel enraged them, and they retaliated against their Jewish populations, who then fled to Israel. There are no Jewish refugees because Israel absorbed them. The Arab world, despite all their oil wealth and land, refused to absorb the Palestinian refugees because they saw the Palestinian refugees as a useful propaganda tool and a useful population to indoctrinate against Israel. The indoctrinated Palestinian refugees shown here are protesting the restoration of Jewish holy sites. When Israel declared independence in 1948, one of the countries Palestinians fled to was Jordan. Palestinians who fled to Jordan turned against the Jordanian government and attacked Jordanian civilians and soldiers, forcing the Jordanians to drive them out of Jordan in a battle known as Black September. This is a picture of Palestinian Arab fighters in Jordan. The country of Lebanon foolishly absorbed the Palestinians fleeing Jordan. The Palestinian Arabs murdered thousands of Christians in Lebanon. Israel cannot afford to repeat the tragic mistake made by Jordan and Lebanon of absorbing murderous Palestinian Arabs. This map puts the Arab-Israel conflict in perspective. Israel is a tiny country surrounded by vast Muslim countries. They are not fighting Israel because of lack of space for the Palestinian Muslims. They are fighting the Jew because their religion commands them to. When the Arabs make propaganda about supposed Israeli atrocities every time Israel defends itself, it is important to note that over 100 million infidels died at the hands of Muslims as they invaded the areas shown on this map. Muslim atrocities continue today. In fact, as of August 2012, there have been over 19,000 deadly Islamic attacks since 9/11. This fact was posted in a second Metro North ad in response to the first one I mentioned at the beginning of this video. The man being crucified here helped the United States hunt down terrorists in Yemen. Christians and friends of the West are being brutally persecuted throughout the Middle East, but the same countries who unfairly criticize Israel don't lift a finger to help them.